how did you kind of come across this idea? I mean, have you always had an interest in sort of the psychologically quirky?
Yeah, I've always had I've always been really interested in the brain and human behavior, and my writing partner on the project, Mike Sussman, who's a co-executive producer on the show, came to me, this was a few years ago, and he had an idea about a character who was, let's see, this is the tricky part about not giving it away. He had an idea about a character who was suffering from mental illness, and or a kind of a mysterious mental illness that was somewhat inexplicable, that it was possibly supernatural. It was unclear what this character was going through. And it was more of a thrillery kind of show that Mike was interested in doing at the time, with kind of some science fiction sort of overtones. Actually, it was sort of an anti-science fiction show without getting into it too much. And I thought this character sounded really interesting, but I really wanted to figure out a way to take a character and put him into a procedural format. And I've always been really fascinated by Oliver Sacks and all of Oliver Sacks's writings about the brain, and Mike is also a fan of Oliver Sacks. So we just started talking about if we had a character like this, a character who was an expert on the brain and human behavior and all of the weird kinds of neurological and psychiatric disorders that were out there, it'd be a really fascinating character. And of course, it would be a more fascinating character if he struggled with his own neurological or psychiatric issues. And we tried to figure out how we could put him into kind of a procedural format, and we discovered, in fact, that there is a certain reality to medical experts, psychiatric experts doing psychiatric and neurological forensics for the FBI, that the FBI will, in fact, hire consultants on particular cases. Of course, we have an entertainment television version of that, but that sort of began the idea, which was that if you could take Oliver Sacks and make him a crime solver, what would the show be? And then we were really fascinated with the idea of playing with reality and kind of keeping the audience off balance and keeping the audience guessing about whether what they're seeing is real and what isn't.
Now, do you have consultants who work with you? Because it seems like there's a lot.
We do. We have a really brilliant young neuroscientist named Dr. David Eagleman, who just published a book that's on the New York Times bestseller list now called Incognito. And David Eagleman is kind of a rock star neurologist who does TED Talks and stuff like that. And he teaches at the Baylor College of Medicine. And we've had several meetings with him, phone conferences. He came to the set, he met Eric, and we have regular kind of phone conferences with him. He reads all the scripts, and he tells us whether we've screwed up the neurology or any of the science, and or if we have questions when we're breaking the story, we might call David and say, hey, if we wanted this to happen, what would be the disorder, what would be the symptoms? So we're in regular contact with him. And we had some help on the pilot from an expert in certain psychiatric conditions. Mike, what was Dr. Michael Green, who is not a formal consultant on the show, but he helped us on the pilot when Mike and I had some questions. And he teaches at UCLA.
What liberties have you taken in terms of the psychiatric aspects?
Well, I mean, we have to represent it in a filmic way. And so if you talk to people who suffer from these kinds of conditions, they have different kinds of experiences. Some of them feel like they see things. Some of them feel like they just hear things. And of course, because we're representing it in a dramatic way, we visualize what we think that Pierce sees. And so, there's a huge spectrum. These kinds of disorders are on a huge spectrum, and so our character is suffers from mental illness, but he's very high functioning, and there's a lot of sort of anecdotal reality to characters who have found coping mechanisms to deal with this condition when medication isn't necessarily effective for them. But what you'll see during the course of the series is medication for this character is an ongoing struggle, and it becomes very clear during the course of the series that his not being on medication is not necessarily the responsible thing for him to be doing. And he struggles with that during the course of the series, which really mirrors the struggle that a lot of patients who suffer from these kind of conditions have. They cycle on and off the medication and often feel that they can function really well without the medication, and then sometimes discover that they can't. So we've tried to, depict this in a realistic but obviously, entertaining way.
I noticed in the pilot that it's never named. Is that because it's a pilot and you want it?
It is.
It
yeah,
was?
you must have missed it. He says one time.
Yeah, but he says it as, I think, that I can say it because it's just me, but schizophrenic hallucination.
Yeah.
So
He
that
does
means
say
it
that.
is schizophrenia.
Yeah. In the pilot, he says you had an incident. Tell me about it. And he says, what's to tell? It's a schizophrenic hallucination, the product of randomly firing neurons.
Oh well, I didn't necessarily interpret it as being.
But I am very hopeful. I know you've all signed stuff that we want people to come into it and have the pleasure of discovering what's going on with this character, so that they're not already on the lookout for kind of what's real and what isn't.
So once they see the pilot, they'll see obviously that he sees people that aren't there, and one of the people that he sees is someone who essentially helps him solve the case.
Yes.
So how did you guys make that decision because without a character like Collins, could he have still solved the case the way that he
Well,
did?
I mean, all of these characters that he sees in our conception of the show, all of his visions, his hallucinations, his delusions, are all part of his own brain. I mean, so everything that they're saying to him is effectively happening in his very fractured mind, and he uses them to make sense out of things that don't normally make sense to him. So it's his brain that's doing it all, but this is the way his brain works. His brain works by giving shape and character to his thoughts.
Should we expect to see though in future episodes?
Right, like at the end, I'm still here. Does that mean every episode there'll be someone who's there until he figures it out, or?
Well, you'll have to watch and see. What I will tell you is that we work very hard to keep the audience guessing about what's real and what isn't, and sometimes I think that they will think something absolutely isn't real and it will turn out to be.
And that'll continue.
And vice versa. Yeah, that will continue. So there will be, it's not so formulaic, but he certainly experiences hallucinations and delusions that sometimes really are an impediment to his getting through his day, and sometimes are a help to him. So it's kind of his curse is also his blessing.
What's the deal? I mean, in terms of Eric McCormack, I mean, most of us pretty much knew he had the chops to do this, but how surprised were you at what he brought to this?
I think he's kind of brilliant. My partner Mike Sussman, when we were in the casting process, mentioned him, and I thought, that's a really interesting idea. And then it turned out that, of course, the network had done a show with him that didn't last, but they loved Eric. And so once that idea was in our heads, Mike and I had lunch with him, and he had read the script, and he was really interested and interesting and had really fascinating questions. And once that lunch was over, I thought, wow, I think this guy's going to be great. And then, every day he would just come in and surprise me more and do something, in a way that I hadn't imagined. And I don't know what you guys thought, but I think he's just, kind of brilliant in it. And he's incredibly prepared and very thoughtful, and he comes to work with ideas, and he's just been great. And it's interesting because the project was gestating for a long time, and occasionally names would come up for the role. The network would have some suggestions of names, and the studio might have a suggestion, and we were coming up with names. And so my wife was hearing all these names suggested, and after she watched the pilot, she said she just couldn't imagine anybody else doing the part. And that's how I feel now. Months after months of doing it, I just couldn't imagine anybody besides Eric.
He's somebody who has that double-edged sword of being connected to a character that everybody loves. And aside from even the personality, which is so different, like from the second he was on the screen, the physicality His
totally
hair,
different.
his look, everything. Was
Yeah.
that intentional? Were you
Yeah,
trying-
absolutely. Well, we wanted, and Eric wanted to, show a completely different side of himself. And this character, I think, he has to show a lot of sides of himself. We absolutely wanted him to look different. We thought it was true to the character, that the character, would be much scruffier, and he's not as scrubbed as, Will Truman. He, which is true of people who deal with these kinds of challenges and conditions often. He's not. So yes, we definitely wanted him scruffier and shaggier. And it was really interesting. The network did some testing after the pilot, and they were, and in order to even participate in the testing, the participants had to be really regular TV viewers. So there's almost no way that they could not have ever seen Eric, and there were a shocking number of people who didn't even make the connection until the show was over that it was Eric. Now, I don't think he looks that different. I just think that's a testament to his acting ability. He's a completely different character on screen than he was as Will Truman. And I suspect if you went to see, Eric doing The Music Man on Broadway or something, which he did a few years ago, he would be completely different as well because he's a great actor.
And Rachel?
What about her?
How did you end up with her?
Oh, well, Rachel came in and read for the role, and she came in on the very first day. We must have read, I don't know, Mike, what, 100 actresses, 50 actresses. Well, we probably read 30 or 40, but the casting director probably read a couple hundred. I'd always been, aware of Rachel from some of her kind of teen performances, and she came in on the first day and just nailed it, and I thought, wow, that's pretty great. The character just came to life, and then, day after day after day, these other actresses would come in, and every day we'd look at each other and we'd go, Rachel Lee Cook. And we brought her up to the network. The network said, oh, Michael Wright, we love her. Brought her in, she read for the network, and, that was, she came in and read for the part.
In the pilot, we don't really get to know her that well. Are we gonna?
Yes, you're going to get to know a lot more about Kate and Reddy. You're going to get to meet her dad. You're going to find out a little bit more about her history and why she left Washington, and some personal stuff that's going on in her life, and so you'll get to know lots more about her.
What can you say about her relationship with Pierce? It seems like there's affection, but it's complicated.
Yes, I would say it is complicated. I think she is a student who, when she was 19 or 20 years old, had a huge crush on this guy. And I think she still has a crush on him, but she's a grown-up now, even though she's, extremely youthful. I won't tell you exactly how old Rachel is, but Rachel is, she might tell you when she comes in and talks to you, but she is certainly old enough to be an accomplished FBI agent, but she has this very, very youthful appearance, which we try to write to, and we think is kind of fun because people underestimate her and don't quite take her seriously and look at her and think, oh, well, she's, a small, demure young girl, and in fact, she has a lot of strength and authority. I'm sorry, I've completely blanked on your question.
The relationship.
Oh, so she has a crush on him. I think she admires him greatly. I think she's attracted to him. And I think that he, when she was a student, he could think, oh, well, she's cute, but it's inappropriate, but now she's all grown up and there's kind of no avoiding it. But I think for Pierce, he feels like he's, because he's so difficult to deal with because of his condition and who he is, that he would never subject somebody that he cared about to having to be with him. So I think he holds people at arm's length and tries to avoid getting too close personally, but I think deep down he probably shares the attraction. So we'll play with that a little bit. And of course he's in a very strange little triangle because there's somebody else that he, as you saw in the pilot, has very strong feelings for.
And how will we get to the bottom of what exactly their relationship was?
If you keep watching over the course of the series, so I hope what'll be one of the great things about the show is that every week you're going to get a really interesting, twisty, turny mystery with the beginning, middle, and end. But there's a thread that runs through the whole season. We've done, we're shooting our 2-hour finale now. There are episodes 9 and 10, and there are little hints and clues and things that happen during the course of the season that tell you more about Natalie and who she is and what Pierce's relationship is to her. And just when you think you know what that relationship is, it turns out to, in fact, be something else. And by the end of the season, there'll be pretty much a full resolution to who she was, how he knows her, where she comes from, and kind of a little mind-blowing twist at the end of the season.
Can you
We
talk
only
about?
have about 2 more minutes. Just so you
Can you talk about the character of Lewicki?
Yeah, so Max Lewicki is Pierce's sort of major domo. He's kind of his factotum. He's a super smart guy who we will discover. Can I talk about things because they're going to?
Yeah, I mean it's embargoed, so if there's any spoilers.
So we will discover that Lewicki met Pierce when Lewicki was working as an orderly when Pierce spent some time in a psychiatric institution, and that because Lewicki didn't really put up with his crap the way that other people did and could kind of stand up to him, and also knew what Pierce's condition was. Pierce knew that he needed somebody to kind of help him manage and kind of get through everyday life, and so he brought Lewicki with him to the university and got Lewicki was trying to go to graduate school but didn't have the money, and Pierce got him in with a teaching assistantship to become his teaching assistant so that he could get a graduate degree but also be there to kind of help Pierce navigate his way through the world. So they have a kind of a bantering relationship. They kind of go at each other, but deep down they're really, they love each other, and Lewicki would lay down his life for Pierce, and you'll see during the course of the season the loyalty that the character has. But also there's a lot of fun between the two characters.
And we'll get to know him better as well as.
Yes, you'll get to know him. You'll get to know him a little better as the season goes on. He has a funny little romance during the course of the season with an unexpected character that you will all enjoy very much.
We've already met in pilot.
Well, if I told you that, then you know the answer. So you'll get to know him a little bit better. Yes.
Last question.
Going back to Daniel's illness, were there any aspects of Asperger's syndrome thrown in there?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, some people have sort of read that into it. I think that the truth is that not intentionally, although there are some sort of overlapping, sometimes some overlapping behaviors and conditions, even though these are two, wildly divergent conditions, and I don't pretend to be an expert in either one of them. But the sort of the aversion to loud noises and the feeling of not being comfortable in crowds and some certain kinds of social awkwardness also are also part and parcel for some people who are suffering from what Pierce is suffering from, and also I think can be true, from what I understand, of people with Asperger. So I think you might see some similarities there, but it's certainly not our intention to say that he also is dealing with that condition. With that.